Hi everyone, my name is Sehaj, and today I'll be talking about my final project on how children show implicit and explicit in group bias, especially when they're placed into minimal groups. I chose week 4 because it really highlights how early social preferences begin to form, sometimes even before children understand the meaning behind social categories. For example, the Kinsler 2007 study showed that infants prefer native language speakers over foreign language speakers, which suggests that babies already use language as a cue for social similarity. Xiao 2017 found that older infants associate own race faces with happy music and other race faces with sad music, showing that infants are already forming emotional associations tied to group categories. And Pun 2017 showed that infants not only prefer pro social individuals but are also sensitive to whether that pro social behavior comes from someone in their own language group. Overall, these studies tells us that infants are not neutral observers. They notice and interpret group cues early in life, and these early patterns shape how they engage with the social world as they grow. These insights made me curious about how these early preferences evolve in older children, so I looked at three additional articles to build the motivation for my study. Dunham, Shen, and Banerjee 2015 showed that implicit intergroup attitudes remain very stable across development. Children as young as 5 show strong implicit in group bias, and this bias looks similar in older children and adults. However, explicit biases changes over time because as children learn fairness norms and social rules, they often report more equal or socially acceptable beliefs, even when their automatic responses show bias. The second article I read was Sheehan 2020, examined how responses show biases, and they also showed and examined how minimal groups influence children's thinking. They found that children show clear in group favoritism even when group assignments are completely random. They trust in group members more, prefer to allocate resources to them, and assign positive qualities to them. This tells us that the human tendency to form us versus them distinctions is very extremely strong, even without a meaningful group histories or stereotypes. The third article, Farouk 2022, reviewed how these studies or attitudes develop over childhood. The main point was that explicit bias declines as children become socially aware, but implicit biases remain strong because it is automatic and less influenced by social pressure. These studies taken together reveal a major gap. While we know a lot of about implicit and explicit biases separately, we don't see many studies directly comparing both forms of bias in the same children within minimal group contexts. This helped me form my research question. Do children aged 6 to 8 show stronger implicit in group biases measured using the child IAT than explicit in group preferences when evaluating minimal groups? This question is important because this age range is a really interesting developmental stage. Children understand fairness and try to follow social rules, but their automatic responses might still show strong favoritism. If these two systems, implicit and explicit, don't match, it tells us something important about how biases form and how they influence behavior. Based on the research I read, I created three hypotheses. First, I predict that children will show strong implicit biases on the child IAT, responding faster on trials that pair in group with good. Second, I predict that children will report much weaker or no explicit bias because they know they're expected to treat everyone fairly. And third, I predict that children's behavior in a sticker sharing task will match their implicit biases more closely than their explicit ratings. In other words, children may say they like both groups equally, but when the decision feels more natural or spontaneous, they may still choose to favor their in group. To test this, I created a simple and child friendly study inspired by the method using by Sheehan 2020. First, children would be randomly assigned to either a blue group or a green group and would wear colored wristbands to help them feel connected to their group. They would also see cartoon faces representing in group and out group members so the categories feel concrete. Then, for the implicit measure, children would complete the child implicit association test. This involves categorizing positive or negative words along with in group or out group faces as quickly as possible. The reaction times show whether certain associations come more easily. After that, children complete an explicit liking scale with smiley faces to rate how much they like each group. And finally, they complete a sticker sharing task that measures their actual behavior. This three-part method gives us a complete picture of how children think, feel, and act toward different groups. If my hypotheses are correct, the results should be very interesting. I expect that children will show strong implicit biases but much weaker explicit bias. This would match what Dunham said, that implicit attitudes are stable and present early in childhood. At the same time, explicit ratings should look more equal because children understand fairness expectations. However, in the sticker sharing task, I think children will still show in group favoritism, which suggests that their real life behavior may reflect the biases they are not fully aware of. This pattern would support Farooq's review that implicit attitudes often guide behavior more strongly than explicit beliefs do, especially when children have to make decisions quickly or without much reflection. The implications of this study are very meaningful. It implicates if implicit biases remain strong even when explicit biases appears to decrease, it suggests that surface level fairness, like saying I like everyone equally, does not necessarily reflect deeper automatic preferences. This means that interventions to reduce bias in school should not only focus on teaching fairness rules but also on shaping children's underlying experiences and interactions. Cooperative play, diverse friendships, and positive representations of outgroup members could help shift these automatic responses. Another important implication is how powerful minimal groups are. If children respond so strongly to groups that don't even exist outside the experiment, it means real world categories like race, culture, or language can influence them even more deeply. Finally, this research can help teachers when they know the right thing to say. Recognizing the gap between implicit and explicit attitudes allows adults to better understand and support children in developing genuine empathy and fairness over time. Before I end, I also want to reflect a little on why this project matters beyond just academic interest. Working through these studies really changed the way I think about how children learn social categories. I realized that bias doesn't always come from negative intentions. It often comes from the simple way our brains organize the world. Infants start with preferences based on familiarity, like language or race, which we saw in Kinsler and and Xiao. Then, as children grow older, these preferences can turn into automatic associations that stay with them, which is exactly what Dunham's work explains. By the time children each reach ages 6 to 8, they've already balancing two forces, their automatic reactions and the social rules they've learned, and sometimes these forces do not match. This is why studying both implicit and explicit attitudes together is so important. It helps us understand not just what children say, but what is happening underneath their awareness. Not just when these two systems conflict, children might behave in ways that even they don't fully understand, and adults might misinterpret those behaviors. My proposed study helps make these hidden processes more visible, especially within minimal group contexts where there is no culture theory, history, or no stereotypes, with no real conflict. If children still show strong in group favoritism under these conditions, it tells us that bias is not just they learn from society, but parts of it may come from natural tendency to prefer people like us. Another thing I found meaningful is that this research gives us hopeful directions for intervention. If minimal groups can quickly create favoritism, they can also be used to build positive connections. We can design group activities that mix children across differences and create shared identities, which reduces bias by shifting the us versus them boundary. Schools can create classroom identities, team based collaboration, and cooperative problem solving activities that encourage children to see more overlap and less separation. Understanding how implicit and explicit attitudes work helps us design strategies that target both systems, teaching fairness on the surface but also shaping the deeper automatic associations children hold. Overall, working on this final project helped me connect everything we learned throughout this course, from infants' first social preferences to children's developing sense of fairness and group identity. And I hope my proposed study shows how these ideas can come together to push the research forward. Thank you again for listening, and I really enjoyed exploring the topic.